So I started a podcast called ADHD Wise Squirrels. And on the podcast, I speak and interview, with both a mix of ADHD experts, be it doctors or ADHD coaches, but then also with high achievers with ADHD, people like Dr. Bob Dempsey, who was the former director of NASA's International Space Station for 16 years before being diagnosed with ADHD at 60. And he has a pretty sweet job these days too. So it's just interesting to hear from folks and to share their stories, but also inspire others.
Welcome to The Boost, conversations with people promoting mental health. And I'm here with a friend, Dave Delaney, and I can't wait to talk with Dave and for you to learn about him. So Dave, we'll just turn it to you. How are you doing today?
I am good, Steve. Thank you for having me. It's a Friday. It's it's always good to catch up with a friend. So I'm in good spirits. I'm glad I realized this morning that it is in fact Friday. That's what my calendar told me, because it's been one of those weeks or maybe months where I've been a little foggy on like what exact day it is. Like I actually shocked my neighbor, my buddy, yesterday, because he was like talking about what are you doing on the weekend. I'm like, oh, I don't know. I still got a couple days to figure that out, I guess. And he's like, it's tomorrow or in 2 days, I guess. And I was like, oh yeah, of course. And he was like, no, you didn't realize, did you? So anyway, I know what day it is, and I am happy to be here with you, Steve.
I don't know. That's partly a sign of I'm glad to be with you too. And it's partly a sign of like, that's a classic entrepreneur signal for me. It's like the person who's like, oh, it's Friday. I've got maybe like 20% of my work week left, versus like, what are we doing tomorrow? Tomorrow is also maybe working some. But
it's funny too, because like my wife's a school teacher, so she has like a regular job, and many people do, and I have had them as well. And when you have a regular job, unless you work on weekends, you're like, Friday, yes, I'm out of here.
Everybody's working.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for the Canadian Loverboy reference there.
Welcome.
As a proud Canadian, I will take it happily. But yeah, so she's excited. Friday's like, for the weekend. And I'm like, really? Because I still have some work to do. Like,
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah. I've been playing around with this, and maybe, I don't know, curious what you think about like taking Wednesday off, or like, how do you do it when there's so many priorities, so much work? You've got Wise Squirrels going on. You've got Future Fourth. We'll get into all the cool projects you're working on and the why behind it all. But like, how do you pace yourself when you could work 7 days a week?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Or maybe you don't. Maybe you're like, oh no, I work 7 days a week.
Well, I mean, I do work a lot, but at the same time, I also know when I've run out of steam in a day, and I'm not like I am a hard worker, certainly. As far as like working on a computer goes, I'm not like digging holes or something, building things like actual real work. But at the same time, I struggle with taking time off to do things leisurely for myself, because I always envision my wife working, and she's like a school librarian. So she is dealing with endless, like if she's lucky, she gets 20 minutes for lunch every day, if she's lucky. Yeah, and she is balancing, faculty with technical problems, because librarians now have to do tech support. She's struggling with, children, in and out all day, and she runs some classes for them, plus, parents. And so it's an ongoing, exhausting existence for her. And she gets home and she's done. And so I envision her, and then I'm like, I struggle with it a bit. I know I need to do it. I need to take breaks and go for like walks and do the things. But at the same time, I'm like, I picture her, and I'm like, it's hard to give myself permission.
Yeah. 20-minute lunches, man. That's tough. That's tough to fit into a system and a structure like that for me and probably a lot of people. But yeah, kudos to her doing. That's hard work. That's good work too.
Yeah.
My wife's a healthcare recruiter. She's all kind of always on. My mom was a librarian.
Yeah.
It's also kind of doing that good work and not getting nearly enough kudos and support for it. So yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into a couple things because there's so much to cover here. I mean, you've been podcasting since 2005, since like before people knew what podcasts were. You were doing it. You were blogging way ahead of time. You and I connected through an email marketing service provider where we both worked together for a while. But you've got a book and a new one on the way. You've got 10x conference speaking, coaching, and so there's a lot to touch on. Hopefully, we get into it, but I want to give you
Yeah.
the kind of the floor to do that. So let's do the two questions we do here, which is the virtual hug, which is your moment of gratitude, somebody or something you're thankful for, and then the shameless plug where you can tell us what you're working on.
Yeah, so I mean the hug is will materialize into an actual real hug because of course it's my wife. Just setting the stage there. Uh, it is my wife. I mean she's an incredibly hard worker. She's incredibly dedicated both to the family and to her work as well. Teacher of the year again this year.
Well done.
So, yeah, they do recognize her for her hard work, but
Good.
yeah, so I'm very thankful. She's a great mom, a great partner, great friend.
That is a great one. Yeah, that's awesome. Celebrate that. And your shameless plug. Tell us about the work you're doing.
Yeah. So you mentioned a couple things there. So I have a company called Future Forth, and at Future Forth, I do many keynote presentations, workshops all around communication skills, and I developed something new called the 10x conference coaching, which is really taking everything I've learned over the years from exhibiting at trade shows and conferences, being a keynote speaker, developing my own content. I was a speaker for Google for nearly 6 years. So I've taken all of that and packaged it up in a way that I can coach companies to maximize their ROI of sponsoring and exhibiting at conferences based on, what is in that sponsorship package. Extracting stuff from my own book, New Business Networking. So how to, I talk about the three ups of networking: showing up, following up, and catching up, and how to do that the right way. So ultimately, companies spend hundreds, thousands, millions exhibiting and sponsoring conferences. And so I've dedicated a big part of what I do to helping those companies affordably maximize that ROI and measure it too. Um, so there's that. And then I'm also doing that little podcast I call Wise Squirrels at wisesquirrels.com. And or the podcast is called ADHD Wise Squirrels, but you can get it at wisesquirrels.com. And I'm sure maybe we'll chat about that too.
Yeah, for sure. So the 10x work is fascinating to me. I run a conference. You spoke at it
Yeah.
last year in a couple ways on a panel about podcasting and then about ADHD and late diagnosis ADHD, which we'll get into for sure with Wise Squirrels. But it's
Yeah.
cool that you're going to be helping my conference get better this year by hosting a dinner for sponsors the night before things
Yes.
get going because we kind of expect sponsors to just show up and be ready to roll and ready to go um, and at the same time like working that exhibit hall and doing it in a way that's effective, that doesn't always happen. And sometimes it's down to staff, sometimes it's down to strategy. But you're going to come in and meet with our sponsors the night before and just give them some tips and tools and tricks. So maybe if there's anybody out in the audience right now, like what are some of the basic blocking and tackling, or the basic mistakes that kind of people make when because you've done so many events and at a high level, like what do you see it, either the mistakes or where is it done well?
Yeah, I see it a lot. I see really, I mean, a common mistake is just a lack of preparation, a lack, you've done all the things, and this isn't on the conference planners, because the conference planners try to arm and give the sponsors, what they need ahead of time. But as it gets, and it's also important to be empathetic to the conference planners too, because as you get closer to the conference, if I'm sponsoring the conference, I'm flying my team in, I'm paying for, the sponsorship package, whatever that includes. I've got maybe a booth, exhibit hall, that kind of thing. Maybe I have a speaking gig as well as part of that package. Uh, it Oftentimes what happens is, suddenly as you're getting closer to the event, the sponsor is thinking, "Oh gosh, we should probably do something. We should probably plan this." And then it gets closer and closer and closer to the point where, like, it's either too late or you just haven't done anything and you just sent your team and just hope for the best. But I mention it because for the conference planners, as I said, they often like will provide some value, but as it gets closer to the event, the conference planners, your hat spinning on your head while you try to like figure everything out and put out all the fires, and you're incredibly busy as it gets, you get busier and busier and busier as it gets closer and closer, not to stress you out, be like, oh God. But you get busy and so it's really on the sponsors to take care of this. And so often they don't plan. So, when I talk about networking, I talk about the 3 ups of networking: showing up, following up, and catching up. And just planning around those 3 things, and even preparing ahead of time, of course, but thinking through, like, how are you going to show up? What do you need to do to show up? And then once you're there, what are you going to do? And then after the fact, how are you going to catch up with, or excuse me, how are you going to follow up with the people that you meet?
Mm.
And what does that entail? And then finally, like, how are you going to keep in touch with those folks? Because networking is a 2-way street. It's planting seeds. And if you approach networking like, I'm going to sell something to you and you and you and you, nobody's going to like you. Nobody's going to ever want to return your calls or emails or anything.
Yeah.
So it's about providing value, but, and like any relationship, it takes time to build relationships. And so, catching up is part of that process from time to time of just checking in. And sure, yeah, we all want to maximize our return on investment of sponsoring conferences, but at the same time, yeah, if you approach it in just like, the icky, used car salesperson or whatever, like that's not going to fly. So it's about building relationships. And so that's what I help.
Yeah, there's like 2 ways to really swing that pendulum, and it's fun to talk with a pro like you because you know how to do this and how to work it. But there's like the lazy salesperson approach. They just kind of like kick back in their chair, not really engaging. Maybe they're afraid or nervous, which is understandable.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of you're exposed out there, hoping somebody comes and talks to you while you have these incentives behind you, which are, I need to sell something. So, you have these like needs, and then you have, your own social dynamics, or there's like the pendulum too far, which is like very aggressive, treating everybody like they're a qualified buyer when the customer journey is very different than that. Like some people are just becoming aware of your brand, and as an extension of your brand and your marketing, how do you meet somebody in that place versus somebody who's maybe a loyal customer and looking to rebuy, or somebody who's thinking about you in the consideration set of a near-term purchase? You treat somebody like that very different. So it's important to meet people kind of where they are on that journey. But it's also true, like the conference planner, like me right now, I'm like, why has not everybody bought their ticket and like you know,
Yeah, right,
like
right.
why is not everybody ready for this conference? Like, well, it's 7 months away. So,
Yeah, yeah,
you
right,
know,
right. Yeah, you want it done. You want
oh
results
yeah, I
right
want it
away.
all done. I want like all the
Yeah,
speakers to be like all ready to go. But then like last year I was on a panel and I was like flying out. I was like, oh, I should probably get a little more prepared, you know, like
right.
because I'm going to land in a few hours, and then the next day is this conversation, and I was ready for it, but I was like,
Yeah,
it was just like two different people approaching an event, you know. So it depends on where you're coming from.
yeah, yeah. That's true.
So tell us about why squirrels. Let's get into that because
Yeah,
that's I think that's really fascinating, and maybe just as much as you are comfortable sharing, kind of what that's
yeah,
about and where it's going.
yeah. I'm an open book about it, so no worries. So last year, um, last year I was diagnosed with ADHD. So 50 years old. It was before my 51st birthday. Uh, so at 50, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and of course that makes a lot of sense in so many ways, right? Um, and in true ADHD form, I launched a website called Y Squirrels to like open. I've always been very transparent and a big fan of the open web and being online forever, as you mentioned. So I just wanted to share what I was going through for other late diagnosed adults so that they could, learn from my experience as well. And so I created ysquirrels.com, and being an early adopter in podcasting and a nerd that way, I was like, I got to do a podcast. I got to add to this. So I started a podcast called ADHD Y Squirrels. And on the podcast, I speak and interview, with both a mix of ADHD experts, be it doctors or ADHD coaches, but then also with high achievers with ADHD, people like Dr. Bob Dempsey, who was the former director of NASA's International Space Station for 16 years before being diagnosed with ADHD at 60. And he has a pretty sweet job these days too. So it's just interesting to hear from folks and to share their stories, but also inspire others. And this is how the presentation, the root down, that I did last year, yeah, that presentation, which has come a long way, and it, it it's I developed it to help anybody, regardless of their neurotype. And it's three sections of knowing yourself, so understanding your strengths, but really there's some strategies there of knowing yourself and then respecting yourself, and that includes self-acceptance, self-love. And then the third section is connecting yourself, and a little bit of networking fits into that as well. So how to do the three. The content from those three sections are for anyone. However, the thread line story of this curriculum is my own late diagnosis of ADHD, sort of my journey in life with this. And a big part of it is to help educate people about ADHD so that um, I can help remove some of the stigmas that are involved, or hopefully all of them, but also celebrate the strengths of ADHDers, and also share some of the challenges that we face at work, especially. Um, and I learned something not that long ago, and I was mentioning it to you offline, that I learned that for the average person with late diagnosed, or excuse me, with undiagnosed and untreated ADHD, not the average person, but somebody with undiagnosed and untreated ADHD can have a life expectancy of up to 13 years less. And learning about this made me realize that like what I'm doing it's more important than I even realized. And so but the podcast is going great, and I'm getting amazing feedback from folks, and it's definitely become a labor of love for sure.
Hmm, that's amazing. I mean, you extrapolate this out a little bit. You know,
Yeah.
you help 100 people in the course of your life, and you might save 1,300 years of life
In theory.
in
Yeah.
theory.
Yeah. I
You
mean,
know, even if it's like an average of that, like you're saving, you
yeah.
could save hundreds and hundreds of years of people's lives by doing what you're doing.
Yeah. And not just that, but also like the stress that that can come with undiagnosed ADHD, and I've experienced it firsthand, and I know it well.
Which might be
Or
the kill. It might be part of the killer, right? Is the
it is
stress?
part of the killer. Yeah, it's so ADHD is a comorbidity of, or excuse me, like stress, or more specifically, like anxiety
Mm-hmm.
and depression, and even like bipolar to an extent, and OCD to an extent, but certainly anxiety and depression are both comorbidities of ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
But oftentimes people go and get treated for the, let's say it's anxiety, they get diagnosed with anxiety, they get treated for anxiety, but the doctor or whomever don't realize that there's a root cause of this. And so you can treat the anxiety all you
Yeah.
like, but it's going to keep coming back because it's it's the ADHD that's causing the anxiety. It's the same with addiction. So ADHDers are pretty prone to addiction and excessiveness, and that could be excessive eating, which can lead to diabetes and poor health, or excessiveness in alcohol or drugs or cigarettes or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that can lead to bad places as well. And so it's understanding yourself and getting treatment, whether it's therapy or medication or a combination of both. I'm doing the combo. I got the combo package. Uh, um, but doing that can help you understand yourself, or certainly helps you understand yourself in that way. And again, yeah, that life expectancy can be affected by addictions and things like that. And even and the connection part of the root down and is about helping to cure loneliness and helping to connect people
Mm-hmm.
and building. And I have a lot of experience in building events over the years, and networking events and things like that. But I've also experienced and do still loneliness, a lot, and have realized that that loneliness and the effects of loneliness are have the same health effects as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So that alone, and again, this stuff is a lot of this stuff is stuff that we all experience, of course. Um, and the difference is that if ADHD is causing problems in managing relationships, for example, or building relationships or sustaining friendships or whatever, um, that can also play a role in this adverse health effects. And then, of course, suicide is also something, but I don't know the numbers on that specifically.
Mm-hmm. So a big message I'm hearing in there is that it's important and not always easy to figure out what's the symptom versus what's the disease or what's the cause, the root cause. It's not
Right.
necessarily a disease, but I see that a lot in biological health. And
Yeah.
we're, moving through this phase of awareness and engagement in mental health like we've never done before. And
Yeah.
so we're learning our way, and we're learning what's wagging the dog and what's causing things, So for anxiety to be something we point at, be like, oh, I'm anxious, I have anxiety, or I have some addictive type behaviors that I'm maybe not controlling or understanding. We could look at the industry and say, oh well, it's addiction and anxiety is what's going on, and not
Yeah.
that this applies to everybody, but what you're saying is
No.
in the case of some people with ADHD, that those are more or less the symptoms of something that's got its roots in something deeper.
Yeah, I mean, some of it could be hyper focus, right? Where like it often gets misunderstood. First of all, like ADD and ADHD are the same thing. So that's one thing that gets confused, and that people think like the H is like hyperactivity. And so if I'm not hyperactive, well, I probably don't have ADHD, but it can include hyperfocus, because as a kid, you might be more hyperactive,
Mm-hmm.
certainly with boys. Um, uh, and so I certainly was a case study of that, of class clown and goofing off and all that. Um, but so being hyperactive as a kid, you learn to, it's called masking, or you know even unknowingly doing so without it being diagnosed, that as you get older, you find other ways to remain, to be sort of hyperactive or hyper focused on things. So for example, you know, everybody, like creators especially, are always looking for flow. We're always trying to get into that flow state,
Sure.
right? Where you just lose yourself in the work. Well, ADHDers do that a lot. Not all, but a lot of them do. So, but the difference is that they may get so into the weeds on something that they forget to eat, or that time goes by, or that it's not the thing that they should be focused on today. It should be on the thing that's going to like actually make money. um, that's part of my story. Uh, so I'm definitely guilty of that. But you end up like spending all this time hyper focused on something that like maybe you should cut back. And then the other part of that is you hit these weird walls of like knowing what you need to do, but not doing that thing for whatever reason. It's interesting. It's like this block of stopping you. And so for years, I go back through all my old journals and things, and it's like, do this, this, and this to grow my business, and written in different ways over the years, and never really doing like one or two of the things. So anyway, yeah, there's a lot there. And so really my goal, and again, it's not all like doom and gloom and, oh, you know, we're all going to die, or anything like that. I mean, you know, I'm an open book in the podcast, and it's we have a lot of laughs. It's often very funny. And, yeah, because, you know, a lot of my story is pretty hilarious, tragically hilarious at moments, I guess. But knowing what I know now, it all makes sense.
Well, you're funny. You just have a natural humor. And and then yeah, sometimes, you know, some of the best stand-up comedians, like you peel back the layer and it's like, oh wow, it's like really some tough times that we're doing some masking that way, maybe with like the pain we're dealing with in some cases.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting too with ADHD, is because ADHDers tend to be quite creative, and you look at like, and they take risks, right, good or bad. So you look at like a lot of stand-up comics, like Howie Mandel's a big one that you know, he's gone on obviously to other things, but he's very open about his ADHD. Jim Carrey is another one, very open about his ADHD. And so there's plenty of like, you know, actors and creatives who have ADHD. Same with entrepreneurs. So there's plenty of entrepreneurs who start businesses. They're risk averse. They just do it. And then you look at like Richard Branson from Virgin, or you look at like JetBlue or IKEA or all these other, you know, many brands. I believe Bill Gates, I think, but I can't remember if he does or doesn't. But anyway, yeah. So many like successful entrepreneurs also have ADHD, and so because they get hyper focused on some idea, and because they're sort of risk averse, they just go for it. And again, that's, you know, there's some studies recently around like the and I'm going to butcher this, but something to the effect about like early man, and how, you know, we really couldn't have evolved or survived without the ADHDers, and that ADHD was actually a huge plus for like, you know, Neanderthals or whomever. And I'm totally butchering anthropology, so I will apologize and shut up. I always make the point that like, I am not a doctor, nor do I play one on the internet. I do not know.
Fair enough.
That's the whole point.
Fair
I'm
enough.
learning along with everybody else.
But these things exist, and they exist, you know, maybe there's a reason or a purpose. And, you know, we're sort of seeing like a grand macro evolution away from people who can carry heavy stones to people who can, you know, program AI. You know, it's like, okay, well, that's very different skill set. Maybe there's quite a bit of overlap between like the stone cutters and the AI programmers, but more likely, like some different skill sets are being used at different times. And
I like the idea of just sitting on a beach with a cocktail while the AI just does all the stone cutting, and then I get a cut of the money for that.
That's
like, 'cause isn't that where work is going? It's all going to be AI, And so then we can just reap the benefits.
Well, that's kind of like Elon Musk's worry, right? Is like the worry becomes what are all these people going to do when they don't have to work anymore? And that sounds a little bit ridiculous given the state of
Yeah.
where we are, but somebody who's a futurist and looking far enough out, you
Yep.
can make that claim like, oh yeah, things have gotten quite a bit easier in some regard.
Yeah. But I also think like be careful where you get your information. And Elon Musk not only is a poor source of information, he's also happens to run a social network that eagerly distributes disinformation and misinformation, and
Distributes the information.
which is part of the reason why I haven't tweeted in a long, long time, and
Mm,
don't plan on it again. I don't even know what it's called anymore. Xing, whatever.
it's
So be
a,
careful where you get your information. That's an important thing.
That's important. So you're not on Twitter. You used to be on Twitter pretty heavy,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I started on Twitter in February '07,
Okay.
and yeah, I wrote a lot about that in my first book in New Business Networking about using different social networks to find people and build connections. But um, these days, I've become quite concerned, jaded about the state of social networks, and while I'm on
Mm.
many of them, I am concerned about. Um, Everything from bots to trolls to, as I said, to misinformation, and there's plenty of that out there. But then also disinformation and how social networks and algorithms and nefarious people are using them to to do bad things. And you look at the state of this country and many countries and how people are infighting, and so much of it is because of social network. It's also because of like the 24-hour news cycle and the monetization of news and clickbait, and if it bleeds, it leads, and all that stuff.
Mhm.
And this could be a whole other topic, but I definitely have a lot of insights and thoughts around the state of media. And yeah, I think it would be good for everybody to get out of their homes and go and talk to somebody in person.
Shoot, I mean that's yeah, we're not going to have the time for all of that, but we should circle back to that. But we have time for some of that, which
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah, yeah.
there is sort of in I'd say a cohort of people who are like pretty hyper aware about where things are going, and people who
Mm,
can see maybe a little farther down the road.
yeah,
You've always been somebody like that, where sort of like outdoors is the new luxury, like offline is the new luxury, and it's always led if it's bled, since like newspaper days. But the
absolutely. Yeah,
problem, I think, the problem with any tool or technology, it could be a financial instrument or it could be a chainsaw, is that like you over leverage that thing, and it can do a world of damage, and we've seen that with
yeah,
over leveraging, you know, debt instruments to over leveraging all sorts of things. And I think the media is in that place. And it sounds like you probably agree, and it's a good thing you're actively
yeah.
unplugging from some of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think. Yeah, as it pertains to like media or social networks or what have you, or AI even. I heard a quote a while back that's always stuck with me, which is "Whoever built ships built shipwrecks," and that's pretty impactful when you think about all this stuff. So it's not to downplay the severity of or the potential severity for things. I really do believe that we're in a state now with technology where it's time for uh, legislation. I think about like being from Toronto originally. I remember when Toronto went non-smoking.
Mm-hmm.
I do because two things: one, I smoked, and also I worked at restaurants back then. I was working at a bar, and I'm like, oh my god, like this is gonna be the worst, and all these things. And as a smoker, I'm like, oh man, and 6 months of winter, I'm gonna have to go outside and freeze my butt off smoking a cigarette. But guess what happened? People quit smoking. People quit smoking. And you can look at studies of like road safety and the number of fatalities have dropped dramatically in this country since seatbelts were introduced and seatbelt laws were introduced. And so motorcycle helmet law and these things that we need, it can't just be anarchy, right? Like we do need like rules in place, and these companies, Facebook or Meta and Google and all the rest, or Alphabet, they all need to be properly legislated by people who actually are knowledgeable enough to do that, and not it's a series of tubes or anybody like that. So it's important. I think we definitely need that. Otherwise, it's just going to be a race to the bottom, and that's what we're already. I think we're moving in the right direction with AI as far as like course correcting where the problems were with social networks and social media, because social networks and social media were fantastic at the beginning. That's why I was an early adopter. But over time, when business models shifted and money was the number one thing and is, and I get that. Even I look at like podcasts now, like some of my favorite podcasters, I don't listen to anymore because they're bringing on guests who are despicable and they're not pushing back, and instead, because they have such huge platforms, they're literally giving these people megaphones. And when you listen to a podcast that's, even short form, but if you listen to a podcast that's like an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, which some of those are, most people don't have the time to go and fact check everything they hear.
Yeah.
And because they hear this information, these facts, regardless of whether, even if they hear it's not true, the fact still remains in your head. And there's psychological studies and all that to back that up. So yeah, anyway, I am concerned about things like that, but getting back to your conference, I think it's such a good, conferences in general are fantastic because they're an opportunity to come connect in person, and nothing will AI all you like. Nothing replaces handshakes, hugs, high fives, and impromptu conversations, getting a coffee or waiting in line to the bathroom or whatever. That's often where the magic happens. But knowing ahead of time how to prepare for conferences and how to follow up and why you should follow up and catch up are really important. And so, you're giving the opportunity for people to get together and share an experience, and that's way better than anything you can get online.
Thomas Insel talks about that a lot. Dr. Insel, he wrote a book called Healing, and he talks about people, place, and purpose. And I do believe conferences are one of those antidotes to loneliness, what I call. And we have to be intentional about it. Some guy in my town, we happened to like connect through a kind of a circle of friends, like invited me out, just for like a coffee or whatever the other day. And I was like, wow, that was like so great of that person to do for my life. Like, I wasn't going to do it. I didn't even cross my mind. And I walked away from that 1 hour, 2 hour meeting thinking, man, that was so net positive in my life. And I try to do that with the conference. And then how do we stay connected in between? And this is you and I are connecting right here. This is one way to do it, but it's tough to beat the in-person engagement.
Yeah. I mean, I started, the events like I as you well know, I co-founded a couple of tech conferences in Nashville.
Good ones.
But I created like 2 monthly networking events between those two conferences in order to like keep the community together and give them a place to go and congregate and hang out. I've recently started a new thing called Nice Maker, which are basically just casual coffee meetings, hanging out. And I've you can find that at the footer of wysquirrels.com, but the Nice Maker is my newsletter. And I'm doing a coffee. I just did a coffee this week in Nashville. I'm doing because I'll do them while I travel too. So I'm speaking at an event in San Diego next month. And so I planned an event there and already have a few people registered. And,
nice.
I wanted to do something like that, but then I kept spinning my wheels on it because I was thinking, well, what about a cocktail hour? What about a meal? What about a movie? What about a hike? And then I decided, like, what the hell? Let's just, right now they're nice maker coffees, but I'm kicking around an idea of doing like go to a movie and then grab a beverage after the movie to talk about it.
Oh,
And I might even be doing that like probably in the next couple of weeks. I'm a big movie nerd and I like supporting the Bell Court, which is the best movie theater in Nashville,
totally.
the only movie theater in Nashville. Yeah, anyway.
Nice. I love that idea. Maybe we could collaborate on that. I was just talking with somebody who has got a really powerful, like, mental health focused documentary that I would love to screen or show and do some kind of panel or post convo. All right, we got to wrap. This hour just flew by, Dave. It's so fun to talk with you in this format.
Yeah, you too.
And you're a great guest, a great host too. So, DaveDelaney.me, Wise Squirrels, or is it Squirrel?
That's plural.
Squirrels.
It's for everybody.
I got it.
WiseSquirrels.com.
Yeah. Where can people find you? Where should they connect with you and how?
Yeah, I mean, if you're listening to this podcast or watching it, and you like podcasts, ADHD, Wise Squirrels is just search for that and you'll find it, or go to wisesquirrels.com. If you're interested in exploring stuff around my conference coaching or anything else around, hiring me to do a presentation or a workshop, that lives at futurefourth.com.
Excellent. All right. Thanks so much, Dave. I hope we connect soon, but thanks for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve. It's been fun.